Stephen Mansfield, New York Times bestselling author and speaker.
Doug Tenaple, I'm the creator of Earthworm Jim.
Tweet groups.
I'm Victor Dweck. Joseph Carter, I'm the Mink Man.
This is Dave Baker from Forged in Fire.
This is Leanne Morgan. I'm a comedian, and this is why you should never.
Don't ever. Not ever.
Don't waste your time.
Oh, you really should.
Listen to those darling, yummy Reverend and the Reprobate.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Reverend and the Reprobate. I am Lucas Pinkard. I am the Reverend. With me, as always, is my partner in crime, the man, the myth, the legend, according to his mug. It's Dan Gibson. What's up, Big Dan?
I already took my hat off and
Big
threw
Dan,
it.
what's up? You did. So today on the show, we have...
Also, you didn't call me Expo.
Prolific author and screenwriter, as well as director. It is the very talented Brian Godawa. We talk about his book, Hollywood Worldviews. We talk about the Nephilim for a long time.
Loved it.
I feel like we found out where Brian's wheelhouse was, and we just sat there for a little while.
Well,
it was
great. His wheelhouse, and it's what I want to know about, because I don't want to.
Spoil, you don't want to spoil the interview?
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah,
I want to tease it that this is a topic I've been very interested in, and it's all theories.
Yeah,
really.
and he's got some not just very fascinating ones, but some ones that seem to fit together logically, rationally.
You backed it up with verses and
it's
information.
Really, really, really interesting how we get into that. He does talk a little bit about his book Hollywood Worldviews, talking about
also,
how
he
we
throws
can
shade on Dune.
Yeah, a little. But not. He said Dune was a good movie.
I took it out of context.
Yeah. So he does talk about his book Hollywood Worldviews, which gives people a blueprint to be able to not just appreciate movies, but also to be able to identify the worldviews that are being talked about in them. It's a lot in accordance with Francis Schaeffer, and if you've seen some of our previous interviews with Nancy Pearcey and people like that, it's really, really fascinating. Brilliant guy. We hope that you guys enjoy this interview. And without further ado, Brian Godawa. On our show today, we have one of the most prolific screenwriters in Christendom, oftentimes known as the script doctor, as well as one of the favorite Christian authors of our good friend David Jesse, who has consumed all of the Chronicles of the Nephilim books. It is the incredibly talented, very brilliant, the student of Francis Schaeffer himself. It is Brian Godawa. What's going on, Brian?
Francis Schaeffer knows. Boy, that's great to hear. You guys know him, man. Because anybody who knows about Francis Schaeffer is a high in my book. Because he's from the olden days, but he's good.
Yeah, he's one of the best. We had an opportunity a few months ago to interview Nancy Pearcey, and when we were talking to her, you were one of the names that she mentioned as we were going through Total Truth. I'm actually going to be teaching a class of the Reverend and the Reprobate. I'm the pastor, and this summer we're going to be going through Hollywood Worldviews.
Cool.
In our Wednesday night class on the summer. So I'm really excited to get to talk about that. And so we'll kind of table some of that stuff, because I know that there's a lot of stuff we can talk about in Hollywood. I only knew you as a screenwriter, only knew you from Hollywood Worldviews, and found out from a couple of friends of ours that you wrote fiction books. And I just wrapped up reading Jezebel, which is an incredible story from the Chronicles of the Watchers. But did you shift from fiction books to screenwriting, or did you start with one? How did you mesh those two, and what was your journey like to get from one to the other?
Yeah, so I started out actually as a screenwriter, and that was my goal, my heart, my soul. All I wanted to do was make movies. Ever since I was in college and before. Well, when I was in college, I was actually studying to be a visual artist, but I loved movies, and I just watched. And that was when I read Francis Schaeffer, and that changed my life, because I always had a struggle on understanding how my Christian faith worked with my art, and I had a hard time, but Francis Schaeffer helped me to see that, helped me to understand worldview thinking. And then I started seeing movies now through new eyes of realizing, this is how they're communicating worldviews, and this is how they're affecting society. And I got so jazzed. I'm like, I want to do movies of truth. And I would go to movies, and that I love movies, but I would go to them and I'd be so sad because they have anti-Christ philosophies or anti-God or anti-Christian, and of course there were some that were, and definitely 30 years ago there were a few more that were more positive towards Judeo-Christianity. But nevertheless, in general, it's a secular society, it's a secular world, Hollywood, and so they tend to, have a mixed bag of stuff. But I got inspired, and I just, that was my goal. My goal was I wanted to write movies, and Yeah. So I started doing that on the side. And I didn't want to become a starving artist by jumping into movies because I kind of knew a little bit about that world. And it's, very high risk, very low reward in that sense. So I just went about my normal day job and I learned screenwriting on the side. And so that's what I did for decades. I still do, but that was my goal and my desire. But as I was growing in that area, learning about storytelling, I noticed something that was really interesting, that all the story gurus in Hollywood, of course, when I first started, there was only like a couple guys. There was Sid Field and John Truby. And Sid Field wrote this classic book. Of course, it's old now. I forgot what the title is. But he wrote the classic on that. And I went to seminars and all this kind of stuff. But now, of course, there's hundreds of story gurus out there. But what I was learning about storytelling for Hollywood is rooted in a very Western paradigm of storytelling. And that paradigm is actually what I was realizing as I was studying it, was how much it really recapitulated Christianity in a very real way. Or at least let's say this, that it was storytelling is a form of redemption. And if you understand how to tell a story, you'll see that it's about redemption and conversion. Now, of course, redemption and conversion can be applied to anything. You could convert to atheism as well as Christianity. So, but nonetheless, the hero's journey very much reflected what Jesus Christ's own journey was, which I came to conclude was embedded within the universe by our creator God. And so, there was this hero's journey before Jesus was alive, before Jesus was on the earth, right? But the truth is our creator God embedded that into the universe, just like he embedded within all of us this sense of, this understanding of that there's a creator and that we're responsible to him in some way. And so I felt like, man, I wanted to share this with the world, particularly with Christians, because I felt that Christians and anybody who loves the Bible, there's a legitimate concern about the bad things in movies and TV, but I felt like in the church, at least, there was sort of a baby with the bathwater phenomenon where they were either throwing it all out because, there's too much sex and violence, so it's all bad, or maybe the other side, which was like, hey, I'm free in Christ, so this is just entertainment. It doesn't affect me, And my goal was to reach both of those extremes. So I wrote the book Hollywood Worldviews, which helped Christians to understand a little bit about story structure so that when they're watching a movie, it's art appreciation, right? I mean, you go to a music class to learn music appreciation, right? They tell you about harmony and dissonance and consonance. And, you don't become a professional, but you understand the elements better so that when you hear music, you'll appreciate it more. That's what I wanted to do for movies and TV for Christians, so that they could discern the good from the bad and have a better, more mature level at which they do start to cut off. Because, for instance, we have to have our limits, right? I mean, I would not argue that, pornography is an acceptable form of entertainment, right? But at what point does it become pornography, right? These are the things that we have to address. And, there are many Christians who would have problems with, like, the first part of a story is focusing on the adultery, like what's the classic
Scarlet Letter.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The Scarlet Letter. Or I was thinking of the what's the one with Glenn Close and Michael Douglas, the Fatal Attraction, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's glorifying adultery. Like, well, no, actually it isn't. If you follow this, it starts out making adultery look good, but by the end of the story, the whole point is to draw you in and turn the tables on you so you realize what you thought was good is bad for you, that kind of a thing. And that's very, very common in a lot of stories, but Christians will react to that initial part of the story and sort of like have a hard time. Now, I realize it's not as much of a problem in today's era as it was 30 years ago, but there's still the element of understanding how worldviews are embodied within stories, and that's how we are affected. And if we're not aware of it, it's going to affect us much more detrimentally than if we are.
And that's something Nancy Pearcey talked about.
Yeah.
That art reflects, I'm trying to remember her exact wording, but the art reflects the philosophy of the artist.
Yeah, and the culture at the time,
yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
those are the biggest influencers, yeah.
I'm always saying that movies are not made in a vacuum. And right. We can look at a movie now that, there's so many examples.
How about Dune?
Yeah, I saw Dune. It was good, but I'm trying to think of things that are relevant in terms of philosophically. You know, I remember
this just in, Dune not relevant.
No. Yeah,
Philosophically.
Good point. No, it is. But yeah, but the point is that this is why you'll see things like, you know, the wokeness, right? You know, for example, Star Wars are all going woke, Marvel's all going woke, right? Why? Because the movies are made within a certain era that's affected by the prevailing worldview, and the worldview that's dominating now is wokeness, and so, you know, which is of course the leftist worldview that is rooted in Marxism, that divides everyone into oppressor and oppressed, and white males are the evil villains of society. So yada, yada. So, now as a point in fact, though, I think that Dune does not necessarily fall into that category. So there are definitely movies that, you know, go against the grain, and that's a beautiful thing. And we need to support that kind of stuff, you know? And so, yeah, definitely I would say that.
Yeah. So I really want to dive into all the Hollywood worldview stuff, and I'm fascinated by all of it. I've got my digital copy of it here, and it's just littered with the highlighter marks and all this stuff.
Highlighters.
Yeah. So, but before we do that, I really want to focus in on the fiction works that you have done, and I'm wondering.
Did I get off on a tangent? I'm sorry.
Oh, you're totally fine. That's what we had you on the show so that
wonderful.
you could talk. Yeah, it was
a
absolutely
wonderful
great
tangent.
So.
What a ride!
Back to the story. Why did I go off into that? Anyway, whatever.
Well, because it is part of what
connected.
Makes. Yeah, I was gonna say it's part of what makes that journey interesting, is because you started off with screenplays and screenwriting. You had this sort of revelation about worldview, and now you've moved into you've become a very successful fiction author. And in the fiction that you write, I'm fascinated by how you got started in that.
I know where I was going. I started out with the screenwriting because I was saying that there came a point in my career where I had a couple low years, as everyone does in the business, because it's a really hard business. And I needed to reinvent myself in a sense, and I needed to expand my storytelling. And I thought, well, I was waiting to write novels down the road, but I thought I need to start now. And that's when I started about 10 years ago. Was my inspiration was, I'm still going to write movies, but I need to expand my storytelling, and let's try my hand at novels. And the thing that inspired me was I actually was writing a script for a movie, and I just sort of discovered this understanding, a biblical understanding that we could talk about. Michael Heiser is the evangelical scholar that I kind of discovered some of it through. Mm-hmm. And it helped me to find a Bible story that I thought would be both inspiring and cool for the believers, as well as Hollywood, which Hollywood was getting into doing all these big mythical epics, whether it's Greek or, you know, whatever, and Egyptian. And I thought, well, here would be a very mythical approach in a sense, but it would be biblical. And that was the story of Noah. And of course, what happened was, this is, like I said, 11 years ago, I wrote the script. Oof. And I'm like, oh man, you know, I don't have any context. I didn't have big context in Hollywood. And I realized the problem is when you're a small guy and you've got this mega budget script, you don't have good chances, you know? Yeah. But then I found out Darren Aronofsky was making his Noah movie. And I thought, oh, you know, he's going to beat me to the punch for sure, because I'm not going to get mine made. So I thought, but I was worried that he might have some of the understandings that I had. So I said, well, how can I beat him to the punch? Well, I might as well write the novel. And sure enough, it came out like a year before his movie did. Anyway, I adapted my screenplay to the novel, and that's what launched my novel writing career. Because what happened was, I had this sort of a theological epiphany in my understanding of a narrative thread through the Bible that I had not understood before. And a lot of it has to do with these weird esoteric things in the Bible, the Nephilim and the Watchers and some of these things. And I always had trouble with these problem passages, but as I studied it, and it begins with Genesis 6, verses 1-4. And the sons of God saw that the daughters of men on earth were beautiful, and they took for them wives, and they gave them Nephilim, the giants of old, heroes of old that were giants and all this. So that was the weirdest thing in the Bible, and I could never deal with it. So I just ignored it. But when I found a way to deal with it that actually made theological sense through Michael Heiser's work, then that's what helped me to see this storyline. And when I wrote the Noah novel, which is now called Noah Primeval, the first in the Chronicles of the Nephilim series, Noah Primeval, and it sort of embodied that hero's journey, of course, but also this trying to apply this sort of supernatural understanding of the Bible that I had not had before. But I realized as I was studying it more, I was like, oh, I could get, not just one book. I could get like a series of 3 or 4 books, maybe. Of course, it turned out to be 8, and now it's up to like 12, and it keeps going. So the point is I saw a narrative thread in the Bible that was fascinating to me that didn't change my understanding of the Bible so much as open it up in some fresh ways of understanding the Bible that still retain their orthodox context, because many people are often worried about that when they hear, new ways of seeing the Bible. What? That's not, that's heresy. Yeah. And believe me, I've been called a heretic enough for many of my views, including my end times and et cetera. But so that was the beginning of that journey. And so the Chronicles of the Nephilim, this Nephilim was the concept of what are these giants, and there are different views. Some say they're not giants.
I want to dive in deeper into that right now.
But first off, is Nephilim the proper way to say it? Because I've heard Nephilim,
It's Nephilim. Or Nephilim, but
Nephilim.
It's the anglicized word is Nephilim.
Okay.
So I saw my mom this past week, and we went over to have
Is
lunch.
your mom a Nephilim?
No. Do you want to add that to the list of
the list of things she's going to beat me up for?
No. And so I mentioned, that you were coming on, and that you'd written a bunch of books, some of them about the Nephilim or Nephilim. And
Nephilim's fine. Yeah, however you say it.
So I was curious because I am interested in this, and I've read about it. And I mentioned to her, I said, what do you know about it? And she said, it's something in the Bible. I know it's in the Old Testament. I'm not really sure, which it seems to be that's what everyone thinks is, you had mentioned I just kind of skipped past it, ignored it. So what is the Nephilim? The sons of God
and the daughters of man.
The daughters of man and made giants. What does that mean? What is that?
Yes.
To you?
Well, so here's the thing, the classic passage is that Genesis 1-6, not 6:1-4. But there are different interpretations of that. I'm very aware. But the truth is that, and I think Michael Heiser, this is where his book, The Unseen Realm, which I highly recommend to everybody. He's an evangelical believing scholar, and he makes the best scholarly argument about it. But it basically, in terms of the language and the linguistic origins, Nephilim does mean giants. People are going to try to say it doesn't, it means fallen ones, but it really doesn't. It's connected to the Aramaic Nephilim, which is definitely means giants. And how you find this out is there's only 2 places in the Bible where it mentions it. Genesis 6:1-4 talks about, sons of God having sex with human women and bearing them giants and all this. And it's like, what? The Nephilim, basically. But then there's another passage, and this is where kind of the clarity comes in. And this is Numbers 13, 32-33. This was, when the Hebrews were spying out the land, and the spies came back. We all know that story. And the spies
came back and said, right. They said we're like grasshoppers, right?
Right. They said the land through which we've gone to spy out is a land that devours its inhabitants. That's a concept that's connected to this whole thing too, by the way. Devours, which is violence, maybe even cannibalism. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, another reference to giants, Anak, come from the Nephilim, and we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. So there's a verse where if you're wondering what Nephilim, does it really mean in Genesis 6? It's pretty clear here that they're saying, those Nephilim that we read about in Genesis 6? Well, they're in the land of Canaan now, and because the Anak, which is another sort of like a clan or tribal name for the sons of Anak or the Anakim, he says they come from the Nephilim. And the only other place where Nephilim is mentioned is Genesis 6. So there's a clear theological connection going on there. And here in Numbers 13, it's really clear that, okay, these are giants. Okay. I mean, come on. And there are many passages actually where all throughout Deuteronomy, and I chronicle these in my own books as well. I have a book called When Giants Were Upon the Earth, and it's my biblical research for my Chronicles of the Nephilim series. See, I knew that Christians would be reading this stuff and they'd be going, what? Where'd you get this from in the Bible? Yeah. Right. And I accept that because I'm a Christian and I like to have things proven to me too. So I put this book for those who wanted to go into the biblical research so you can enjoy both of them. And in there, there's all kinds of references to the Anakim who come from the Nephilim, and the Anakim are giants. And there are other giant clan names as well. Emim, Zamzumim. These are all in Deuteronomy, and they come up in various places. Rephaim, and they talk about them being great and tall, like the Anakim, right? And so, but what's so fascinating was in Joshua, I didn't even realize this. Like in Joshua, there's this passage where it talks about, like at the end of Joshua, chapter 11, 21, and Joshua came at that time cut off the Anakim from the hill country, from yada to yada to yada. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, did there remain some. And so he took the whole land according to all that Yahweh had spoken to Moses. So that there's something where you start to realize, oh my gosh, this Anakim is kind of connected to the harem, or the ban, right? Where God said, go in and slaughter all the inhabitants. Well, he didn't say to slaughter all the inhabitants of all of Canaan, just of specific tribes. Yeah. And all these tribes, if you look them up and study them, they have connections to the Nephilim or the Anakim giants. And so there's this connection, is the theological connection that I'm getting to. And there's a lot more to this, but it's that the those in which they were slaughtering in that land of Canaan are the justification goes back to Noah and the flood. And actually, Noah's curse on the son, the grandchild or whatever, Canaan, right? There's this whole curse thing that's going on. That's where these children are coming from. And so that's what they represent is in a sense, the seed of the serpent, so to speak. Right. And wow. And so I read that passage in Joshua where it says, so this is a quick survey, obviously. Right. But, there's only some left in Gath. Where's Gath? Well, who came after Joshua? Judges. And then who was the second king? David, right? Yeah. What was David's big champion? Goliath of Gath. He was a giant. Well, here's another fascinating thing that I just love, because this is the stuff you read, and this is what I read for years, and I would go, wow, that's bizarre. But I don't, I believe the Bible. So if it says a bizarre thing, it happened, but I don't understand it, and I just keep moving on, right? Well, here's the thing. We all know about Goliath of Gath, but we don't know is that there's like 5 other giants who were hunting David. And the Bible actually says this. 1 Chronicles 20 and 2 Samuel 21 and 1 Chronicles 11. And we read various descriptions. One of them is there arose war with the Philistines, and Sibbecai the Hushathite struck down Sippai, who was one of the descendants of the giants. And the word there is translated in different possible ways, but that's the general, understanding is. And then it describes Elhan, the son of Jair, struck down Lami, the brother of Goliath the Gittite. And then there's a man of great stature who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. And and Ishbi-Benob in 2 Samuel 21, one of the descendants of the giants whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze. And he sought to kill David, but Abishai, the son of so-and-so, came to his aid and attacked the Philistine and killed him. So there's literally in the text is saying these specific giants are hunting him down. So, of course, I had to write that story. So my novel, David Ascendant, rather than taking the typical, storyline that most people take, of David and Bathsheba and, the love story, all that, right. I tell all the story before the Bathsheba incident, actually. And it's this notion where once David kills Goliath, these 5 giants or so, I think it's 5 or 6, I think it's 5, were hunting him down, including Goliath's brother, right? And so they're in this warrior cult, which is sons of Rapha, the giant type of thing. And so, that's my fictional story that I tell, which is full of action and romance, but it embodies that stuff, that weird stuff that's clearly in the Bible, but it makes sense of it by filling in between the lines, if that makes sense.
Well, I love that.
It really does make sense. And I think it's very cool what you're doing. And one of the things that I always, whenever I teach the story of David and Goliath especially to kids, David goes and he gets 5 stones from the river. And what we tell them, if you look at the lineage of Goliath has 4 brothers. Is that David didn't go get 5 stones because he thought it was going to take 5. David didn't think he was going to miss. He just took extra stones in case one of the other,
Yeah. Now,
I
here's the
love
thing.
that confidence.
Yeah.
It's not actually four brothers. See, I know that the people get that from reading these verses that I was reading to you. But when it says the descendants of the giants, it's not meaning they're all brothers of Goliath. There's only one that was actually a brother of Goliath. I mean, that's a minor point that I don't need to quibble over. But they're onto something that I think a lot of people don't think about, because we just breeze over those. Wow, that's a bizarre incident, right? You know, a large man with 6 fingers and 6 toes. And that's part of the whole mythology of Nephilim, is that many of them had 6 fingers and 6 toes on their feet. Where does this come from? What's the point?
They all had that? That's part of it?
No, not all, but
okay.
But some are said so in the Bible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
maybe.
That's where in Second Judges is where Inigo goes and takes out all of the 6-fingered.
This is a Princess
Bride reference.
Hold on. One follow-up question on the Nephilim, because I'm not ready to move on. I feel like we have a lot to get to, and hold on.
We do. I want to stay in this track, though.
Nephilim top. The sons of God, with the daughters of man. Who are the sons of God, do you believe, that were able to produce giants?
Yeah, now that's part of the that's the next controversial element that does need to be dealt with, and I do. And so the sons of God are in Genesis 6, and that's where it says the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took for them wives as they chose, which is a form of force, by the way, I might add. Now there's the belief that was like the righteous line of Seth, or pagan kings or such. I deal with all those other viewpoints and discredit them completely in my book, When Giants Were Upon the Earth. It's basically, you have 2 basic views, which are the sons of God human, or are the sons of God divine or heavenly or angelic, right? And so I hold to the angel view. I'm going to use the word angel as a very loose, inaccurate, or imprecise term, because I don't think angel is always the best term. If you do a study on it, it doesn't. We assume angel means a certain kind of being, and it sometimes does, but it sometimes doesn't. So, but nonetheless, they call it the angelic view, right? And I would say the divine being view. These are creatures from God's heavenly host, in other words. And the problem is that when you'll hear the people's description of the sons of God in this Genesis 6 passage, they come up with I'll grant them, very creative ways of trying to explain how they're men or humans, royal figures or some kind. But the problem is everywhere else in the Bible, it's pretty darn clear that these sons of God are angelic beings, right? So you've got Job, where it says that, let's see here. Where do I have this? Sons of God. There
he says, "Oh my gosh, everything. All my people are dead, and my oxen and houses are."
So in Job, they sit and they eat with him.
Here we go. Yeah. So Job 1 and Job 2,
Yeah.
the sons of God come to present themselves before the Lord. And the description is in the heavenly throne room, right? And then in Job 38, when God created and laid the foundations of the earth, the morning stars sang together. By the way, morning stars is a reference to divine beings in the ancient world, including the Hebrews. They saw the stars. They linked the stars to the heavenly host. They linked them to the heavenly host of God's throne, which were the angels, the divine beings. And it says that the sons of God shouted for joy, which was a parallelism of morning stars singing together. So they're very clearly, again, the sons of God were not humans. They're there before creation, right? And they're very clearly divine beings in the heavens, and they're called sons of God. So sons of God is a technical theological term, actually, because there are times where people say, "Oh, but Israel is called God's son." It's like, no, actually it isn't. He does say one verse where he says, "For Israel is my son," but he doesn't call him a son of God, right? And he doesn't that term "sons of God" is never used of anything other than these beings in God's heavenly realm. And by the way, that term is also what's the word? Used synonymously with the concept of gods. And that's another sort of shocking thing as an evangelical Christian. We believe in monotheism. But when you start to discover that throughout the Bible, there's this reference to the gods of God's council, like Psalm 82, God stands in the center of God stands in his divine counsel in the midst of gods. He holds judgment, right? Yeah. And so there's this whole thread. And again, I go through that all in my book, but my book, Psalm 82, I actually wrote a whole little book about just Psalm 82 and how that's connected to the divine counsel and the watchers. And then we hear these other divine beings. Well, there's a whole nother package about the watchers, but let's get into the watchers next. But so the sons of God, there's a very strong tradition within Orthodox Christianity, and there's a very biblically strong arguments that it's clearly the sons of God are divine beings. And so, yes, it's a shocking thing so Genesis 6 says angelic beings are having sex with human women. What?
Basically, they pull a page out of Zeus's book.
Yeah.
And
well, but
come
here's
down
the thing, though,
or vice versa,
and make half human, half God, Olympian.
Well, that's what I think actually happens. If this kind of thing really did happen, it would make sense to me that as man spread across the earth and the Tower of Babel and all that, they would transform the truth into lies and create their own versions, right? So I would expect there to be those myths like that, So, but then the sons of God thing, now that morphs into the watchers, and that's the final, I think, theological big thing that I deal with. And of course, the watchers are only mentioned in the book of Daniel. And that's an interesting thing because that's where we read, it's in, let's see here. I'm not as prepared as I should have been for having my verses on my fingertips. Here we go, watchers.
Me either, but it's what I do for a living, so it's more disappointing when I don't.
Yeah. So Daniel is where we hear about this. I saw in the visions in Daniel 4:13, a watcher, a holy one, come down from heaven, right? So this idea, the term, there are synonymous terms. Sons of God, watchers, holy ones. There are many terms that are used of these same beings. And in Daniel, it's this, okay, these watchers, okay, what are they? And then you hear about the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones. And, if the sons of God, by the way, sons of God are described in other passages as the host of God's heaven, and the hosts of heaven are those that it's, the uncounted multitude around God's throne in his heavenly courtroom or in his heavenly throne room. So basically those heavenly hosts, right? So my argument would be the watchers are those kinds of beings, but specifically they are those who have been given the authority and rule by God to have authority over the pagan or Gentile nations. And so, for example, Daniel 10 says, the prince of the kingdom of Persia stood with me 21 days. So this is Gabriel speaking, I believe. And most scholars will say the prince, that word for prince is a spiritual authority. It's not a human king. And, you can do a whole study on that, but trust me in this one that they're spiritual princes. So what does this mean? The prince of Persia fought with me, but Michael, one of the chief princes, Michael the archangel, came to help me. And this is Gabriel talking. And then later it says, and then he also has a fight with the prince of Greece, I think in Daniel a little bit later. So there's these princes over these nations, prince over Persia, prince over Greece, and Michael seems to be the prince over Israel. What is that? What is that explanation? Well, I argue, and this goes back to Michael Heiser's material, because I think he was the first really good scholar for me that helped make sense of it. And this goes back to the Deuteronomy 32. And in Deuteronomy 32 was a fascinating thing, passage, because it is where, let me see if I can find it here.
This kind of sounds up while you're looking that up. This kind of reminds me of Frank Peretti's This Present Darkness.
Yeah, that's the spiritual warfare motif. Okay, but right. Here's a difference: is that the modern day Christian spiritual warfare movement, I'm not really a part of. I don't believe in it that much. I believe there's demons, but the way that they believe there are territorial spirits now over the nations. But we'll get there in a second. Okay. But in general, they believe the Peretti books were demons of lust and demons of this and that. But this is more at a high level. This is like the generals of the war type of thing, rather than the agents below, the demons or whatever. And in Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 10, it says, it's talking about Babel, Tower of Babel. when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, right? It says he divided mankind. That's the Babel, right? Dividing mankind and fixed the borders of the nations according to the number of the sons of God. There it is again, sons of God. But the Lord's portion, his people, is Jacob, his heritage. Now, the concept here is there's inheritance, heritage, portion, allotment. These are all terms that in the ancient world are related to land. And so he's basically what he's basically saying there, and I explain this in my book Psalm 82 and in all my novels, that at Babel, when God was splitting the languages and the nations, he was doing like what Romans 1 said, like mankind was continuing to refuse to worship God, right? And right after the flood, you'd think things could start over and get better. No, they ended up uniting in evil, building a tower to reach the heavens, which would be to communicate with the gods. And it just started all over again. So God was like saying he gave them over, right? Yeah. He says, okay, if you're going to worship these false gods, I'm going to place you under their authority. And all the Gentile nations are going to be under the authorities of these sons of God. But I'm going to be the authority over Israel. And my land's going to be Canaan, which of course he's going to come in and take later. But so that's the concept, that all the Gentile nations are under these authority of these watchers or sons of God. Now, the idea there is that, well, these are fallen sons of God because, in these other passages, the description that it's referring to tends to be the fallenness, like Genesis 6. Right. There are sons of God in God's throne, but some of them come to earth. And that's the Genesis 6 thing. So, in my camp, I'm saying he's referring to the fallen sons of God here. And so what's the point? And the point is that this is the whole driver of the land motif in the Old Testament. Israel's going to come into Canaan. God's going to kick out all the Nephilim and all that garbage that was representative of that original Genesis thing, and he's going to clean the land up. Messiah's going to come in, and his seed is going to take his land, while all the other nations would have their own under their own authorities that refuse to worship God, the Gentile nations. But if you follow if you follow the Messianic prophecies, you see the seed is going to come, and you read like even Psalm 82 and the Messianic prophecies. What did they describe? They describe as Messiah coming to inherit the earth. And so I work out the theological biblical principle that when Messiah comes, Psalm 82, arise, O God, a resurrection, O God, right, and inherit the nations. If in that context, the concept here is that these watchers over the nations are these spiritual powers, but when Messiah comes, he is going to disinherit them from all the lands, right? He's going to, you read this in Psalm 82, when Messiah comes, he's going to destroy them like men. He's going to kill them like men. What? Divine beings can die? Well, yeah, that's what Jesus said in John 10, was it? Or, he talks about, he quotes Psalm 82, and he's saying, like, just like they're divine being, you believe in divine beings. I'm one of those, but I'm a truly unique one, right? But the idea there is that when Messiah comes, he's going to disinherit them, and he's going to, he's going to kill them. He's going to destroy them and take the land back. And that's the gospel, you guys. The gospel is, there's many aspects to atonement and to the gospel. Yes, the substitutionary death of Christ, et cetera. But there's also this Christus Victor motif, which is he takes back the inheritance from the powers, the principalities and powers that Paul was writing about. Jesus would take those back with his ascension into heaven and judgment upon Israel and the institution of the kingdom of God in the first century. That constituted the initiation of the kingdom of God into the world, where people from every tribe, every tongue, and every nation would now come into the city of God, which is the gospel. And see, the reason why they couldn't in the past, all the Gentile nations were under the domination of these dark spiritual authorities, whatever they are, right? Yeah. And Christ frees us from that bondage, and that's now why all over the earth the gospel just boom goes out all over the earth, and people from every tribe and nation, because they're no longer under that allotment, and those watchers are no longer there to have territorial authority. So this is why when people talk about this concept that I'm saying in the modern day world, they're completely unbiblical and anti-gospel is my argument. I'm not saying they know this, but
Right.
they're anti-gospel because what they're saying is Messiah did not disinherit the watchers. He did not disinherit the nations from these other gods. And so therefore he has not, the kingdom of God is not there, is not here, right? And so if the kingdom of God has come with Messiah, then he has accomplished that, right? And that's why people are coming in. So does that make sense?
It does. It's way deeper an answer than I thought we were going to get, but
I've never
really
thought
interesting.
I've never thought of it like that.
And look, I mean, we could talk for hours about each
no
Bible.
doubt.
I know that Christians are probably sitting there even now thinking, yeah, but what about this verse? What about that verse?
Oh, for sure.
I get it. But trust me, there's explanations for all of it, and it makes more sense within this narrative. And that's why
I love
wanted
the
to
story arc, that it's not just, like you said, the substitution, the redemption through his death on the cross, but also this whole other chapter of
this stuff's happening now. Yeah.
Disinheriting. I'm not sure. I don't remember how you said that, but disinheriting the other principalities. I love that, and that would make a great story.
Well, if you want to get started on these books, the first one, Noah Primeval, is actually you give it away on your website. You can jump right in and get some of that explanation.
I got to finish Dune Messiah, and then I'm on to that.
And then you're on there. So the thing that I think is interesting is now that you've gone through the Chronicles, you've done the Chronicles of Apocalypse, now you're in the Chronicles of the Watcher. The latest one that's been released is about Jezebel. How in the world do you take that character, right? That historical. I mean, let's talk about it in the real sense. How do you take that historical person and try and fit her into some of these other stories, because she's so sinister in the way that she does everything. What was that experience like, and how do you bring some of the details about Jezebel to life whenever you approach a historical figure like her?
Sure. First of all, just so your listeners understand, there's 3 series: Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Apocalypse, and Chronicles of the Watchers. And they're basically, you can interweave all the stories. The truth is Chronicles of the Nephilim was my first series, and then I realized there was more to be told. So Chronicles of the Apocalypse comes after the Nephilim, but Chronicles of the Watchers are individual novels like Jezebel, and my new one's coming out in December, Moses. You can literally fit those within the timeline in the biblical order of timeline, right? Yeah. So so Jezebel can be a standalone novel, or you can read it in the order, stick it in the middle of Chronicles of Nephilim, if that makes sense. Because I wanted to retell stories that could feasibly contain this watcher element. So what I do in all the novels, which is a little unique, I think, in the sense that it's the spiritual warfare novel. That's a common theme, and you've brought it up already. This is the idea where you portray what's going on in the spiritual realm, angels and demons battling, that type of thing. But I have like I said, my stories, I pull back the veil and show what's going on in the generals, what's going on with the like the overlords, the mafioso leaders, right? Yeah. Those are the watchers. And I have a whole storyline of what they're trying to do, which is rooted in another theological concept of trying to pollute the seed of the woman, which Messiah would come out of. In other words, I think that the seed of the serpent versus the seed of the woman, right? The first Messianic prophecy in Genesis 3. Well, I think what they were doing there is they're trying to pollute the bloodline so Messiah could not come. I think that there might be some very validity to that theological concept. So that's what I have my watchers doing. And of course, the true story of Jezebel is she brought Baal worship into Israel. Yeah. So if Baal does, so here's my other, look, there's fiction in the novels, folks. I use fantasy as a genre to reveal spiritual truth. So I push the envelope. I have some fictional fun. I have Leviathan as this giant sea dragon with 7 heads. I don't believe that stuff is real, but I have it taking place in the spiritual realm, and it's to show spiritual realities. What does it really look like? I don't know. Yeah. But this is one way of at least depicting the theological truth of this watcher stuff and how it might unfold, because the biblical and ancient Near Eastern concept is this. Jesus said it, on earth as it is in heaven. What was that? Well, that was a concept that was well known to them. They believed that there were principalities and powers over nations and even cities, right? Ruling authorities on earth had ruling authorities over them. So when there was a battle on earth, there was a battle in heaven. Thus you get Elisha saying, "Go, God, open the eyes of my servant. They're about to have a battle and we're going to be destroyed." And he opened his eyes and he saw the chariots in the heavens, right? Because it's connected, right?
Yeah.
So that's what my storytelling does is I try to tell the biblical story, but I show how might this theological concept of watchers and stuff be connected to the earthly powers. And, am I saying so the premise is, what if the ancient gods the gods of the ancient world, Baal, whether it's Set in Egypt or, Anubis or Horus, right, in Egypt, or in Canaan, Baal, Ashtoreth, this kind of stuff, Asherah. What if they were based on real demonic entities? No, I'm not saying that every god that exists is a literal demonic entity, but Deuteronomy 32, Moses says that when the Hebrews went into Canaan, they worshipped other gods who were demons. He uses that word, shedim, in Hebrew, which is roughly demons. It's not exactly that, but it's close enough. It's saying these are spiritual entities. And so my premise is what if the spiritual entities is the way this fallen sons of God works? They masquerade as these gods of man, and they get people to worship them instead of Yahweh. And that's part of their whole process, And so it's sort of an attempt to sort of make theological sense and tell the story in a creative way. And again, I got off track from the Jezebel, but Jezebel has a lot of Baal worship in it. And so what I do is, here's the other cool thing, like for Christians who, not everyone's like this. Okay. I get it. Some Christians don't want to know anything about pagan religions. Why should we know anything about it? It's pagan. We should just study the Bible and just study Jesus. Well, I get that, and that's okay. But there are those of us who are interested in understanding how all the thinking of man relates to the Bible, in the sense of, there's some truth in everything. So where did that truth come from, right? So you've got different flood stories all over the earth, right? Well, where do those come from? Well, if there was a real flood, then maybe they would have these different stories. Well, how did they get there? How did they change? How did they alter? And so it's my contention that you understand a lot of the Bible better by understanding its ancient Near Eastern context, which includes the pagan religions around them. Since after all, the Bible keeps saying that Jews just keep worshiping false gods over and over and over and over again until God ultimately divorces them. But they keep worshiping over. So they are heavily rooted in that stuff. Therefore, you can understand some of the concepts in the Bible by understanding the ancient pagan origins of it. Am I saying that the Bible's syncretized with false religions? No, I'm not saying that at all. I don't believe in syncretism. I believe in subversion. And I've written two books on this as well, that the Bible takes some ideas that are even pagan and they redeems them and changes them for God's glory. Leviathan is my favorite example of that. If you look at ancient Near Eastern cultures, Egypt, Canaan, they all had the Leviathan, the sea dragon, long before Israel did. But when Israel used that term, Leviathan's not a dinosaur, guys. And I do a whole study on Leviathan in my books. Leviathan is basically a symbolic symbol. It's a symbol of chaos. And the Hebrew writers are using it symbolically to describe this is the chaos that our God is crushing or pushing back in order to create his established order. Because in the ancient world, order and chaos was a dominant theme. No thanks to Jordan Peterson. But chaos, well, he picked it up, right? Yeah. But it is a primal theme in all religions, including the Bible. Right. And so what I'm saying is, there are some things that actually, God says, no, Leviathan isn't the Canaanite god of chaos or whatever. It's a symbol of chaos that I crush. When you read Deuteronomy, you see Deuteronomy suddenly uses a lot of storm language about Yahweh that it didn't use when it was in Egypt. And it's the same exact language that the Canaanites used of Baal. I mean, described Baal as rider in the clouds. Yahweh is described as rider in the clouds, bringer of the rain, bringer of the dew. So the point here is not that the Jews, the liberal will say, well, see, Jews just evolved out of pagans.
Right.
No. What they're doing is they're culturally appropriating. That's literally their first cultural appropriation is. They're basically saying Baal isn't the storm god. Yahweh is the storm god. And they use that language to subvert Baal. Baal doesn't ride on the clouds. Yahweh is the rider on the clouds. What does riding on the clouds mean? He brings storms of judgment to people and cities and nations. And so understanding the pagan context of a lot of, Hebrew thought helps you not to become liberal or to become, lose your faith. It actually strengthens your understanding of the Bible so that you're not reading it through our modern eyes, but through the ancient Hebrew eyes. And that's where you start to see things very differently. And you start to see where a lot of the things that we assume in biblical interpretation, I just read the Bible, the plain language of the Bible. Well, if you do that, you're actually misinterpreting the Bible because you're interpreting it through your context instead of the ancient context. So this, and there's, tons of examples of this all over the place, but that's the goal of all my storytelling is to explore these ancient context, which includes some of these pagan religions, and sort of show how Judeo-Christianity ultimately conquers these. It takes them over, and Yahweh is the true God that smashes all the other religions. You know what I mean? Like just like his kingdom will smash all kingdoms as time goes on, right? So
just like Fatal Attraction, you need to start with the concept and see it through to its end, and then you find the truth.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that you get at in Hollywood Worldviews, to kind of shift gears a little bit. And you take a similar approach when you talk to the Christian audience, because the Christian audience in the fiction books is going to take at and analyze, did you use this? What was taken out of context? We don't know this for sure, even though they're fiction books, because if you want to talk about toxic fandoms, the Christian fandom might be the one of the biggest ones. In Christian worldviews, in Hollywood worldviews, you talk about two different kinds of people whenever they consume media. There's the glutton and the anorexic. The cultural glutton and the cultural anorexic. So why do you think Christians often fall in these two extremes? And can you give us some definitions for those terms?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I think that humanity tends to just be binary and polar. This happens in every level, right? Politics, religion, within denominations, all this stuff. And that is, we tend to go to two extremes. And, I hate, a lot of people don't like this, but the truth is often in between both, not always, but I'm just saying, the truth is often in between both extremes. And so the cultural glutton is the person that thinks that they can watch anything they want because it's just entertainment. So, or I have freedom in Christ, so it's not going to hurt me. And then the cultural anorexic is the one who says, "Oh, there's bad stuff in there, so we must keep it all out of our diet altogether," right? Yeah. And so in this case, I think it's a good classic example of the need to be somewhere in between, where there is good and bad in everything, in every movie, in every series. But the truth is, there's good and bad in every church sermon. So do you walk out and leave a church because you don't agree with everything in the church sermon? No, you interact with it. You draw what you like and you agree with. And if you want to talk to the pastor afterwards, you can, or whatever. But you don't just
hear that?
Quit.
Don't just walk out in the middle of my sermons. Brian Godawa has said you're not allowed to.
And also, don't talk to me after. I've got to get lunch. You can write it on the note.
There you go.
Obviously, if you're teaching heresy, but you got to prove that it's heresy, not just a different opinion within the Orthodox belief, Right. I mean, some people believe that, if you don't believe in the rapture, you're a heretic. I mean, come on, people. So we tend into those extremes, and then but the truth is that there is much good. So I wanted to say was that there's nothing in this life. We are sinners. We are in the image of God, but even Christians are still sinners. So we are a mixture of good and bad. Do we, walk away from people because they're not perfectly sinless? Like, no. You have to be able to discern what's good, discern what's bad, and then you do have to define your limits about at what point is it the negative outweigh the positive. But like I said, everything's like that. Everything in the church is like that. You have to outweigh the negative. At what point, some point in my past, the churches I was going to were increasingly becoming woke. And it got to a point where it was like, okay, this is evil now. They're calling evil good and good evil when they did this.
Yeah.
And so I left the church, right? But until that time, and they're kind of liberal, and they still value Jesus Christ. They lift him up and all that. But then when they started calling a just shooting of an evil criminal as racist when it wasn't, then that was like, okay, this is evil now. And this is what Isaiah said, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Right. And then that was a point in which I left. But there's lots of in-betweens that you have to judge and you have to tolerate. And then sometimes you just want to be a voice. You stay and you stay and you fight for what you believe in. So that's what I think movies and TV can be like as well. And I've drawn a lot of good from movies that I don't even agree with. The Matrix is the old classic one, it was like, wow.
The only good one.
Yeah, the good Matrix.
Yeah, the only good one.
1999.
Yeah. But it's like, or even Star Wars, the original, right? Okay, if you really look at that, this is, very clearly New Age redemption. And Matrix is using Christ imagery to support a Nietzschean type, and I wrote a whole award-winning article on this. But the point was, it was still a powerful story. And there was some truths in there that actually I felt related to me as a Christian. Like, to me, Christianity was very much like waking up in the pod and pulling the thing out of your mouth and going, oh my gosh, everyone's a slave around me. That described my Christian experience. So there's truth within those lies, but you have to be able to discern them, or they're going to turn you, instead of discerning, but this is not right, but this is, that kind of thing. And that's my goal with Hollywood Worldviews. And that's my goal with the whole thing of, appreciating movies and television. And so, yeah, that's my goal.
Yeah. And I think you take a very Schaefer-esque approach in the way that you do it, because one of the things he was really known for, and the reason he gained so much popularity, especially during his time period, and why he's continuing to influence people, is because he wanted to dissect the worldview without throwing out the art. There was something about, a painting or a philosophy or poetry or music or whatever, where you could look at it and
music
you could dissect.
Especially.
Yeah, where you can dissect the worldview that it comes
throw
from.
Out the baby with the bathwater with music.
Yeah, especially since you're such a huge Motley Crue fan. So there's
this is not true.
There's so many things that you can look at and say, well, this is garbage and we shouldn't do or listen to any of this. But maybe a guitar riff in there is something that's really exceptional, or that there's something in it to be appreciated, because we all share that imprint of common grace and that kind of thing. And you talk about that in Hollywood Worldviews, is that we're all trying to tell a story that is transcendent. And you use this word transcendent over and over. And I've heard other interviews with you where you use the word transcendent. Why is transcendence in particular such an important part of cinematic storytelling?
Well, okay, because what we said earlier is true, and that is because all storytelling does not exist in a vacuum. And in the current world in which we live, still, I would argue, and there's you could argue from multiple themes, but I think one of the biggest elements of a worldview that has affected a lot of thinking in all things, the arts and politics, et cetera, is the atheistic belief that there is no everything, there's only material reality. There's no supernatural, anti-supernaturalism, right? Or materialism, where the belief is that there are no supernatural entities, and therefore they're all fairy tales, et cetera, et cetera. And that dominates a lot of thinking. Or you could call it secularism, right? The concept of secularism is this religion and all that stuff is just the fanciful, stuff they make up. But what really is reliable is science and empiricism and, measurements and, that kind of a thing, and reason, rationality, right? And so, but the problem with that worldview is if you look at it honestly, which many of them don't, but they destroy all ability to have anything that is objectively or transcendent, meaning something that is over our experiential reality. So, for example, you might say, oh, there's nothing but matter. Oh, really? So, but do you believe logic is true? Like, I can disprove, if I use logic, or if you use logic, you can disprove my Christianity. Yeah. Well, where's logic? I don't see logic, right? Logic isn't a visible or a measurable item, is it? It's an abstract concept or abstract force, however you want to describe it. It's a law. And that's the transcendence that ultimately atheism does not provide a foundational reality to justify. They'll say they believe in it, but they don't have any justification for it. It does not comport with their worldview. And so for me, and by the way, this is why I think a lot of the modern day epics have gotten weaker. Not all of them, like Dune, for example, isn't. That's a good movie.
Yeah.
But there are many examples where these epics are written by people who don't believe in anything higher than themselves. They're humanists, right? It's just man is the measure of all things, and we make up our own reality, and we make up our own morals, and we live in society, blah blah blah. So they don't understand higher causes. They can't understand Braveheart. They wouldn't write. Maybe they understand it, but they don't have, their worldview doesn't provide any meaning for freedom. Freedom is an arbitrary construct that is just a differential of power. In the modern day world, power is the god. Postmodernism rules. Postmodernism is rooted in power. So there is no truth. There's no transcendence. There's only power. So to me, when you tell stories of transcendence or things to die for, things outside yourself, like a Braveheart, right? You're fighting for something bigger than yourself, the freedom of others, right? And versus power. But classic example of that was the movie Troy. So right. Troy came out, which had some cool fight scenes, and I it was kind of cool to watch as a movie for the cool fight scenes or whatever, right? But so it was retelling of the story from Homer and Achilles and all that stuff, and the problem was that the main point of the story, as well as the movie Kingdom of Heaven, which was about the Crusades, both of these stories were made by people who are atheists who don't believe in any transcendent reality. So it was like an anti-epic, because the whole story of Troy is like, there is no gods, there are no gods. And sure, you could argue, well, the pagan gods don't exist. But the problem is the answer to the pagan gods was, there are no pagan gods, there's just this earth. Yeah. And so therefore there's no eternity. There's nothing that blah, blah, blah. There's no afterlife. There's just the only eternity is your name. Oh, they'll talk about your name when you're dead. And my point is when you watch a movie like Troy or Kingdom of Heaven, made by people who don't believe in higher causes, and they believe higher causes like religions are all fraudulent, they're unsatisfying, because there's no meaning, there's no ultimate meaning or purpose. It's just survival, and so they're unsatisfying as epics, is my argument, because epics are rooted in a notion of transcendence. And if you are a secularist or a humanist, you don't believe in transcendent realities worth of dying for. You may say you do, but you don't have any justification in your worldview for it. So that's how I think storytelling reflects what's going on. And that's why, by the way, I would argue you're seeing the wokeness in movies, and it's turning people off. Oh, yeah. Like when everyone has to be when all action movies have to be led by women, it's like, okay, I can enjoy it if it's Charlize Theron, right? But it's like for kicks and fantasies, right? But like when every leader of every
Cara Dune was awesome.
Yeah.
That's from The Mandalorian, really strong female character, and they fired her for.
Now, I'm not saying strong female characters. What I'm saying is now they're getting to the point where like they have to dominate. And it has to be a higher percentage than men. You have to have all minorities and, all this kind of stuff. And of course, it's good to have diversity. But my point is when you're driven by forcing your ideology onto the story, it doesn't work. Which is my argument about feminist stories. I like watching feminist stories because, I believe that there's some truth in everything, right? But ultimately, they're unsatisfying because it's like when you tell a story where all the men are simply cliches of the lech, the crook, the this and that, and only the women are good guys and the villain is a man and all this stuff, it doesn't ring true to anybody. Anybody who's just a normal person is going to go, well, that doesn't ring true. That's not satisfying, because there are evil women and there are good men. So, it's like anytime you are driven by an ideology, it's over good storytelling, it's going to be unsatisfying, is what my argument is. And so ultimately, the more woke you become, of course, I have no problem with a woman being a lead in a movie. I like women leads in movies. Yeah. But women are not, women are different beings, and they have different kinds of persons and different kinds of roles, and they're not the same as men.
But we've had really strong lead women characters. There was Ripley. Ripley.
Yeah,
from Alien.
Yeah, Ripley. Yeah,
Ripley. Leia from 4, 5, and 6. Ultimately,
Yeah, but
she takes a bad turn in The Last Jedi.
Yeah, well, whatever. So
this is a constant argument we're having whether The Last Jedi is good or not.
To Brian's point, though, is if there's a certain amount of when a character, for lack of a better way to put it, they stay in the lane of that character and go on that character's arc versus forcing something into it, and that's. I think that anybody who's seen the Eternals knows that that's one of the big downfalls of that movie.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Oh, and I know you. I would have loved to. Maybe we can get into this some other time after you watch it. How that goes, but it is one of the things I think that's so wonderful about Dune, is that the characters work within who they are in order to accomplish the goals that are at it. Because Jessica, Paul's mom, is a Bene Gesserit and is a really great, strong female character who does a lot of stuff to take care of it. I think Timothée Chalamet did a great job as Paul, though in the original casting I was a little concerned about that because that's not how the character's written in the book. But it's interesting to see how that in this movie in particular that's different. Do you think that that's a product more of the era that book came out of than it is?
Well, if the closer they stick to the original book. But every modern, I'm sure that I haven't read Dune in 30 years, so I'm sure that they adapted some of it to more modern concepts. But it's just like James Bond too. It's like if you turn James Bond into a woman, sorry, but you're going to lose your audience.
Jamie Bond.
Why can't you make your own James Bond woman or something? Or how about the female Ghostbusters? Right? It's like well, I love female movies, but when you have to say, no more men, we're going to take all the men's stories and make them into all women's stories. No, make your own stories. That's what I would argue.
Yeah, Little Women was good.
What's it? Yeah, Little Women was good.
You guys got one movie. It was fine.
Well, actually, there's another. So this anti-patriarchalness, that's going on. Where the patriarchy, men leading is evil and oppressive, and a history of suppressing and oppressing women, and yada yada yada. The patriarchy, right? Well, that's the new driver in a lot of the stories. And so sadly, like I've been watching this series C. There's a couple of these like this.
Yeah,
The Witcher is another one.
Yeah,
they start out with male action heroes,
Baba Voss,
Baba Voss, Jason Momoa in the first. But then what happens is, and this is a deliberate point, is if you watch the series into even the second season, then basically the men become like Baba Voss becomes a secondary character, and it's all about the women rising up to be queens, and the women's queen here and the queen there and the princess here, and it's all about them, the women having power, and the men become just tools for battles or something like that. And I'm like, look, yeah, of course a queen can rise, but like when you're driven by this ideology that the men have to be suppressed and not rule, and it's got to be all women in power except for the bad guy, right? It's like it just doesn't ring true anymore, right? And I like the series, and I can appreciate it because it's really cool and interesting concept if everyone's all blind, right? But when I start to see this unrealistic, like every hero who's rising up in power has to be a woman instead of a man, and they're replacing the men. Same thing with Witcher. Like, I started watching it because of Henry Cavill, man. I mean, he's awesome. I love that guy.
Great casting for The Witcher.
Yeah. And it's called The Witcher, but then I'm watching the first season, and all of a sudden it's like, this isn't about The Witcher. It's about the queens and the women and the princesses. And I'm like, well, can't you just tell their story in a different story? I want to see The Witcher story,
Yeah.
So that's an example of, again, I love variations in stories. I love breaking the rules and all that. That's fine. But you can see the ideology is now driving the stories, and it's going to be ultimately unsatisfying because there's diversity in our reality. And so, yeah.
We appreciate the time so much, and we want to be respectful of the time that we've had you. We end all of our episodes, though, with a little segment that we called Control Rowdiness. We're going to give you a few rapid-fire questions. so that
no.
we can
I'm
we can
bad
get
at those, dude.
Yeah, well, good.
We
That
did
will make it
cultivate
better.
these for you.
Yeah,
So-
these
so
are
we
these
think
are
that
curated.
These will be good for you.
These are curated questions. There are no right answers, but there are several wrong answers. So make sure you don't step on any of those landmines. And as we get started, Dan, I'm going to pass the torch over to you.
Yeah. Let's see. What horror characters do you think could get saved? Specifically, the horror villains.
That I would want to see get saved?
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, Dexter. In fact, and by the way, I don't say this.
Dexter.
I don't say this as a Christian, and I want to Christianize everything. The way that they set that story up, and they even had a whole interaction with a gangster who became a Christian and was forcing him to look at his human nature, was like awesome. And I thought, listen, storytelling is arcs. You start in one polar side and you go to the other type of thing in terms of learning and your humanity, right? And so it's very natural to go, what would be the opposite extreme of a serial killer? A Christian, I mean, like King David became, right? So it's like, I actually think it would have been germane within the context of that series for him to become a Christian, but of course it would never happen.
Huh. Well, Dexter, that's a great answer. And my wife will love it because she loves Dexter.
What do you think is the worst movie to ever win Best Picture?
Oh man, I forget all of them. I just don't keep track of all of them. I know there was some. Oh, wait. Did Brokeback Mountain win?
Oh man,
Yeah, I think it did.
Did it?
Basically every movie in the last 5 years, because they've all been woke leftist, and literally it has to be a woke leftist, story and theme and stuff. And it's just like, it's garbage, I mean, like they're doing it for politics alone. And again, I don't even mind watching a story about a gay guy or something like that. But if that's why it wins, because it elevates gay guys,
It won Best Director. It was nominated for Best Picture.
Okay.
But still,
I'd have to.
Yeah, I think that's up there. Amadeus is another one for me. That's kind of up there. Like I enjoyed
I do
the
not
movie.
respect you anymore.
No.
That's one of my favorite movies.
I loved the movie. I absolutely loved the movie, but I didn't see it until I was much older, so it felt really slow, and it was so.
Is that about the slave ship?
No,
you're thinking Amistad.
Amistad. What
Yeah.
It's about Mozart.
Yeah, it's about
Mozart.
Okay.
And Salieri.
Yeah, and I don't know.
I do remember there's a couple years, I don't know if it was like when Lord of the Rings should have won and it didn't, or, that was an
Lord
example, I think.
Swept every category.
Yeah, exactly. I just remember I think it won the last movie won, but I think I remember when the first Fellowship was out, whatever won that year, I'm like, no way, that didn't deserve it. Fellowship deserved it. You know?
What's the best Batman movie?
Oh, no question in my mind. Dark Knight Rises.
I agree.
Yeah.
So does that mean that the best Batman is not Lego Batman?
I did love that. I did love it.
I told you.
I loved it.
Will Arnett
thinks
is the best
Batman.
Batman. Will Arnett's the best. He captures.
Kevin
He was a good
Conroy.
one.
Kevin Conroy, voice actor.
He captures a part of the character that nobody else has ever been able to.
I agree
He
with
was a
that.
good. Although personally, I felt that Michael Keaton, in my opinion, had the best personality that matched a bat.
Yep.
If you looking at from that angle, he was the most bat-like in terms of his personality, which I really loved.
He makes a lot of guano.
Well, that's probably why they
quirky little like.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably why they
that's a
also
good point.
cast him as the Vulture. They're like, it's like a big bat with a beak.
Yeah.
What
Okay, ask him about Spanx.
What? Have you ever worn Spanx?
What's that?
Okay, great. They're like things that women put on to make them look more slim. I don't know why that question's on here. What Bible story do you wish there were more details about?
Boy, I don't know, man. Ruth.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I said it because I actually wrote a movie on Ruth, and I sold it to Sony, and it's like just an outline.
Yeah.
The story's an outline, so I had to make up a lot of fiction, but it was fun to do that. But that's one that is like an outline. But really, like Moses too, man. No, wait, no. Yeah, it was Moses. Because I've been working on my Moses novel, and like his first 80 years, they have like 2 events. So like, what happened all up until the time
River
that he killed the guy?
Yeah.
River killed a guy.
He killed a guy, and then he went to herd sheep,
long
and then he came
long
back.
time in the desert.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like, what happened in Midian? What did he learn? All that. I was definitely, as I was researching, I was like wishing, man, I'd like to know more biblical information.
He
on
probably
him,
broke his arm, and he had to have it set with sheepskin, and like there's
Although I
some
did
good stuff
find-
that happened in between there.
I did find some interesting historical legends by Artapanus and Josephus about Moses, which was kind of interesting. So I incorporated those into my new novel.
Nice. And that will, we hope will be out in December.
Yes.
All right.
Moses against the gods of Egypt. It's going to be my most. So this whole concept is there's an actual Bible verse in Exodus where it says, God says, I will execute my judgment upon the gods of Egypt. What? Yeah.
Dang.
So what would that
Rod
look like?
doesn't
They're
stand his
spiritual
chance.
gods.
No, not at all. Brian.
No, wait. I have
goodness.
one last question, and it's a
it goes.
two-parter.
Oh, man.
Are aliens real?
Well, it depends on what you mean by that. I mean, if you're saying are aliens extraterrestrial? No, I don't believe there are. I believe they're interdimensional.
Okay,
or extra-dimensional.
Perfect.
So interdimensional beings have come. This is a.
I know why you asked that question now.
This is a narrative point.
Stargate was cool. Stargate's a perfect example. What a cool movie.
That was
what a
really
bad evil philosophy, but it was pretty cool.
So interdimensional beings have come to Earth, and they're ready to destroy it somehow interdimensionally, unless you tell them a story so awesome within 30 seconds that they won't. That was a terrible setup.
Dude, I'm sorry. I can't even begin to think about that one. Jesus.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. That's easy. Yeah.
Frankly, that's what everyone says,
Yeah,
and it's the right answer.
Yeah. Where is it that our audience can find you on social media?
Yeah, good question. Godawa.com is my website. It has all my information on my books, my movies, and a lot of cool stuff there. You can see my short movies I've made and information on my books. But all my books are on Amazon in paperback, audiobook, and ebook format. So it's all on Amazon. You can, and all the information of everything I've written is on Amazon as well. I don't do a lot of social media. But if you sign up at my website, Godawa.com, you will get some good discount deal offers that other people don't get, and inside information. If you're interested in the stuff I write about, you'll get some inside information for fans and stuff. So sweet. Godawa.com.
Hey, Brian, thanks so much for the time, man. You have a good night, bud.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Hey, Brian freaking Godawa.
Yeah.
So much stuff to unpack in there, and I will just say this: no matter where you stand on him theologically, right? At least the guy has a good explanation for what he's saying when it comes to, and as he stated, these kind of tertiary things, right? These sort of theological
open for
and scriptural
debate.
Things that we wrestle with that are they're sort of open. Yeah, that there's not a lot of information on, that there's the potential and the possibilities of things, and he's not like stringing together things that don't make sense like a lot of people do. He's putting together the biblical narrative and looking at it in a new and different way. There is so much stuff we didn't even start to talk to him about because we got so fascinated with
all I want to talk
Nephilim.
about. All I want to talk about is the Nephilim.
Yeah,
that's it. I just want to talk about Nephilim more and more and more. What are they? How did they survive the flood? Because the Bible says that they were there before the age of Noah and after. So were they on the boat, or were they that tall that they could? They're just like taking a bath for those guys.
I would say read Brian's books and find out. You can get the first one, Noah Primeval, on Godawa.com. So you can sign up for it. If you click on his thing that says books, you can sign up. Get this e-novel for free. It says right down there in the bottom left-hand corner. Sign up for his email list. Get the
Super
novel for
cool.
free. Check it out. And he's got a ton of books there. Make sure that you pick up the book Hollywood Worldviews, which you can also get at Godawa.com or on Amazon, as it talks about how it is that we can look at and appreciate movies from a Christian perspective and still be able to call out the things in them that are untrue or that push us in a direction that's anti-biblical. Totally fascinating interview with a guy that we did not get enough time to talk to, so I'm hoping he can come back on.
And also, I love that every topic we brought up, he was like, "Oh yeah, I wrote a book on that."
Like everything, absolutely everything. Well, hey guys, make sure that you like and subscribe, ding the little bell so that you get notifications whenever we go live on Tuesdays for our live at 5 or whenever it is that we get around to it on Tuesday afternoons, and new episodes every Thursday coming out for the Reverend and the Reprobate. Thanks so much for watching, y'all. Have good, get give, and we'll see you next week.
I'm Brian Godawa, author and screenwriter, and this is why you should never listen to the Reverend and the Reprobate.